What's going on? This is the Saturday Down South podcast. Subscribe to Saturday Down South on YouTube. I'm Connor O'Gara. Will, we have Heisman finalists. We have a playoff bracket. We have all SEC teams. We have coordinator hires. We have Notre Dame throwing shade at Pop-Tarts. We have it all in this silly little sport of ours.
We sure do, man. And yeah, shout out to the Pay Kings, the Atlantic Coast Conference, who played that Miami Notre Dame game according to their complaint, 13 times leading up to the playoff. Notre Dame is now mad at them and taking their ball and going home. That is all-time king petty. If you're the conference that came out 2 years ago and said we are the cradle of quarterbacks, and you do beat one of these good teams, you need to go ahead and plant your flag. That was an all-time commissioner flag planting. So yeah, this week of Notre Dame news has been awesome.
Notre Dame's approval rating, probably not great. I do think that if you are anti-Irish, you are probably more anti-Irish than ever. And that's definitely come out.
I'm pro-Irish, but I just want you to know that. But I'm anti-fighting Irish.
That's what I like. Okay, good. We don't need to revisit no Irish need apply. We're past that point in our country's history here. That's a very good qualifier there. We're not going to have playoff talk today, at least not until latter of the week. Maybe tiny bit of playoff talk, and then we're going to get to some with our interview. But the plan for today, I want to discuss all the key non-playoff SEC developments, because so much of what we're going to do over the course of the next month on this show will be centered around the playoffs. And I know there's perhaps some playoff fatigue. Maybe it's already set in with the discourse about, what needs to change and whatnot. There's going to be playoff fatigue throughout this point. So I want to acknowledge that. So we're going to have that. And then we have a great conversation coming up with our longtime friend, Peach Bowl CEO Gary Stokan, and then Lad of the Week. So, Will, let's start with some key non-playoff SEC developments, because there have been a lot over the course of the last, 10 days or so. Your 2025 Heisman Trophy finalist, that is technically non-playoff. And it also helps to, Jesse Simonton talked about this last year when he came on. He was worried that people were going to skip out on the Heisman ceremony because they were going to have a college football playoff game 7 days later. And this year, none of the finalists, which Fernando Mendoza, Diego Pavia, Jeremiah Love, Julian Sayin, none of these guys will be playing next week. You have two guys that are in the field, but they have buys, and then two guys that are ultimately not in the college football playoff. So that's at least good. I don't know if you've checked this out, but odds are now off the table at a bunch of different places. If you're trying to bet on the Heisman, I think you're probably too late at this point. That's not great. But last I saw was Mendoza at minus 2,000, Pavia at plus 1,000, Jeremiah Love at plus 15,000, and then Julian Sayin at plus 50,000. That would suggest Fernando Mendoza is probably going to win, and Diego Pavia is probably going to be runner-up. TBD on that. That's not always the best indicator.
Fitting that I joked all year about, okay, who's going to save college football? Grown Latinos. We're going to bring in Aguilar, Pavia. We're going to have Fernando Mendoza transfer. We got two of those guys at the Heisman, where it's like, where did you come from? You guys have taken college football by storm. And good for Pavia, who we talked about, and we'll probably get to him a little bit later, but was an all-SEC guy at the end of last year. Did not make the preseason all-SEC team. A little bit of difference because they lose the third team. So there's a third team in reality. There's not a preseason third team. But he actually did better. He's kind of the only quarterback in the SEC that outperformed preseason expectations.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up because, by the way, if Pavia does get runner-up, 27th player in SEC history to finish top two in the Heisman voting, which is just kind of crazy to think of that. 13 guys have done that in the 21st century. You can make the very obvious argument that Diego Pavia is the best SEC player over this 2-year stretch by the fact that no SEC player finished in the top 10 in the voting last year. He is obviously going to be the highest finisher this year. But, I wanted to talk about that because, you asked this question at Media Days, and I've thought about it for the last 3 months. And I kind of have had now, obviously, a little bit of regret with the way that, ballots were filled out and all that stuff. But the question was, has a quarterback ever gone from earning all SEC honors at season's end to then not earning preseason all SEC honors the following year? At the quarterback position, I can't find another example of that. Pavia is one of one. But what makes it even weirder now is that Pavia was the easiest choice for first team All-SEC this year. Not even a question about it. I mean, on three was named Pavia first team All-American. I broke this down because the preseason All SEC quarterbacks, just in case you forgot, and buddy, this is tough to stomach here. Preseason All SEC quarterbacks were Lenore Sellers, Garrett Nussmeier, DJ Lagway, Arch Manning.
Of the three, Arch Manning clearly had the best season.
Right? Go figure. Still not an All SEC.
And he's turned it around a little bit here. We haven't really had a chance to talk about that because they're out of the playoff, obviously. But he's playing some good ball right now. But if you said that was your kind of standard bearer for our votes that we pretty much agreed on, rough.
Yeah, a guy that for at least half the season, everybody's like, "Oh my god, this is the biggest bust ever." And
get ready to learn glasses salesman, buddy.
Yeah, no, Warby Parker. Maybe those commercials are going to go on the back burner for a little bit, but didn't have this disastrous year per se. He still was not an end of season All SEC quarterback. Those went to Diego Pavia, Trinidad Chambliss, Ty Simpson, and Gunnar Stockton. Those were the guys who earned those honors. What a weird trend to play out. And this is happening more and more. We talk about it a lot. For whatever reason, in this day and age, it just feels like the decorated quarterbacks do not live up to it, whether that's because they're all getting private jet deals or what. I don't know if it's just because of that, but we need to remember this. We need to set a reminder to be able to remember this when we're talking about this stuff in June and July, that there's a really good chance that a lot of the decorated quarterbacks that we're talking about deserve to be decorated, but let's maybe set the expectations a little bit lower with that caveat, because we're going to have a lot of decorated quarterbacks coming back. This is going to probably repeat itself. We're probably going to fall into this trap again when you consider that Marcel Reed, who told RG3 that he's coming back to school. I didn't really know that was a debate that Marcel Reed could go to the NFL, but okay. Gunnar Stockton seems like a lock to be able to come back. Arch is expected to return. Chambliss has a pending NCAA waiver to come back. Maybe he goes to LSU. We'll see. We'll see how all that plays out. TBD on Sellers, TBD on Simpson.
I like how the NCAA, at least get respect now that they're like, here, damn. Like, they're just like, you know what, you guys, y'all broke our system. Our system made no sense. We used to not let guys transfer if their, mom was sick. And now if you just want to play a little bit more football, here you go, sweetie. You could have ice cream for breakfast.
But they haven't granted it yet. So
they probably shouldn't have granted Pavia's, if you want to be honest, right?
They got beat in a lawsuit,
right? That's a good point, but that's what I'm saying is like they like based on their rules, that's never been something they've done, so they kind of have no option anymore to just take everyone.
Yeah, it's not like they just bent over and said like, "Oh, Pavia, like here, it's okay. Like here's your little year of eligibility. This is fine." No, like they said, we're going to go to court over this, and they lost. I mean, there is a little bit different than just saying like, screw it, we're just going to give everybody another year of eligibility. And they're in this spot now with Chambliss where it could play out that way. And I don't know how this is all going to go, but you get it. Like there's going to be a lot of decorated quarterbacks coming into the SEC, and probably some transfer quarterbacks that we'll talk about. Didn't even bring up John Mateer in that conversation. What's that going to look like? There are a lot of these other guys that we're going to be talking about a lot who are very much household names. And I do think that preseason all conference awards should be merit-based, and it shouldn't be about just projection, but it's just, I don't know, something to keep in mind here. And I would argue that if there is an SEC player who did the best job of meeting incredibly high preseason expectations, it actually wasn't Pavia by virtue of him not being a preseason All-SEC guy. It was his teammate, Eli Stowers. Preseason All-American, and he's probably going to win the Mackey Award. He took home the William Campbell Trophy, which is a really, really big deal. That pretty much goes to the best player representation of what college football is, and he won that award. That is like top of the resume type stuff for him, and I think he's going to end up being the first tight end off the board in the NFL draft. But, that is quite the feat for that guy, and he's not going to be remembered like Brock Bowers. But if you just compare what Stowers did over a 2-year basis, just in terms of receiving production, I realize that Bowers was a more complete tight end. The blocking is a big part of this as well. So I'm not saying that he's exactly at that level, but if you just kind of compare it on a per game basis, what Stowers did in 2 years at Vandy compared to what Bowers did in 3 years at Georgia, it's not going to be as far off as people would think. And I just think that he needs to get a lot of credit because he had a whale of a season. And when we're watching a lot of these Pavia highlights, which we'll see a lot of those on Saturday night at the Heisman ceremony, a whole lot of them are going to be because Eli Stowers is pretty freaking good.
Yeah, absolutely. And you hit on that, and it applies to Pavia too, which is, I learned very early in my football watching career how hard it is for a guy to live up to the expectations. For instance, Tim Tebow's 2008 season, right? For instance, Johnny Manziel's 2013 season, the one after his Heisman season. It's like you have to be 25% better
Yep.
than your good season to be considered as the same level you were during that season. And it doesn't, because people get so bored and there becomes this anti, like, tear you down narrative, because that's what people do. And it's not really the media. Honestly, it's fans at this point. I think the media are the ones who are really carrying the banner for let's appreciate Pavia and Vanderbilt, because it feels like other people are almost, I don't know if they're tired or what they're jealous of, but that's our perspective going into this. We talked about this a ton of media days, and we had kind of keyed in on Stowers, Pavia. Okay, two guys that are really going to that could live up to it. I think we both said Stowers was a little bit sure of a bet, but I think that goes to show, looking back, okay, that's why Pavia was left off. That's why we didn't immediately think he's going to be, preseason, first team, second team SEC, because it's so rare for guys to repeat that. And that's the rarefied air we're living in with Pavia. That, and again, guys, like outside of like a Mickey Mouse conference, and I hate to say it that way, but if you're in like one of the G4 conferences and you're like a transfer quarterback, or if you're like king of that conference, we've seen guys do that where they just sit there for 2-3 years. They get big as a freshman or a sophomore, and they just own that conference. If you were in a real like Big Ten SEC conference, being in an all-conference team 2 back-to-back years at the quarterback position, right, like a running back position, is really hard to do. And so the fact that the quarterback from New Mexico State, who transferred to Vanderbilt with his buddies and his whole offense, is the one who's been able to do this when Carson Beck couldn't do it. Nussmeier couldn't do it. Sellers couldn't do
tough,
it.
Man. 2-year stretch is hard. When he came to Vandy, he was 16th on all of those offseason quarterback rankings. I'm sure I had an offseason quarterback ranking wherein I put Diego Pavia at dead last. And then here we are 2 years later, and he's going to be the SEC's lone representative in New York in that 2-year stretch. It's just like you can't say enough about it. And the other thing too, and a lot of times, and one of the things that we got into a couple of weeks ago when we talked about like Diego Pavia value to Vandy and all these conversations about, well, is how valuable was Lamar to Louisville and how valuable was, Tebow to Florida and all these guys, and why I said that this conversation needs to be had. Pavia and Stowers are the lone all SEC guys on Vandy this year. And it's not to say that they're the entire team, but you could look at a lot of these other situations, and even like what Mendoza has at Indiana, where there's a lot of guys that are earning all conference honors that are on that Indiana team, to where there's clearly some help there. And it's not to say that Pavia is only in this spot. We always give Tim Beck as much credit as possible, Steve Gregory, the job that he's done stepping into that DC role, but they're just not loaded with dudes in the way that so many of these others are. And it makes the accomplishment stand out that much more.
Yeah, absolutely. And what is you said the William Campbell Trophy?
It's basically it's best player that embodies leadership on the team, like community stuff, academics, and then you also have to be very, very good. Jalen Milroe won it last year. Like Charlie Kohler won it a couple of years ago. If you kind of look at the history of the award, you look at it and you go, okay, it's basically, if you could have a great representative for college football, the college football experience, what would you kind of want? A guy that just checks every single box for you, a set it and forget it, don't have to worry about it, seemingly always says the right thing, and it's just kind of the guy that the coach is, you're never going to have to worry about him. It's kind of that guy. At least that's my interpretation of the award. And it makes a lot of sense, especially if you watch the Netflix special on Stowers and you kind of see his personality. He's the perfect complement to what Pavia is in a lot of different ways. So a big deal, though, a really, really big deal to win that award.
Yeah. And one quick thing, I don't think I've talked about this on here. Guys, there's a tragedy in America that no one's talking about. These awards banquets are getting shut down. The Touchdown Club of Ohio, I was looking at this the other day, is kind of, it shuttered its doors a little bit. So donate to your local football fundraiser, okay? Your local Touchdown Club, because we need all these awards named after dudes. Like, I want a best holder award. Give me all the college football awards. So yeah, I know we always talk about the Heisman, but it's so cool to see these physical hardwares and go back and Google guys when they get big in the NFL, or if they don't, and see, you got like a rock for the Outlet Trophy and stuff like that. I love awards, dude.
Award season is glorious. Speaking of awards, speaking of accolades, all SEC. DJ Pickett not being all SEC is comical. It's comical. I'm not saying this just to to gas you up here, but DJ Pickett, man, I was looking at some of the numbers. He had a 38.8 NFL quarterback rating when targeted as a 6'5" true freshman corner who played 382 snaps at outside corner. Will, the NFL quarterback rating for spiking the football every time is 39.6.
Hey, Connor, I don't know if you saw this. Here's a fun stat that I found the other day. If DJ Pickett went pro today, he's 19 years old, he would be the tallest corner in NFL history.
Yeah, I believe it. Somebody's going to try and mess with him, and I hope that's not the case. I really hope somebody doesn't try and mess with him, because you could have easily exposed this guy if he were just not up to that level as a true freshman, knowing you have this stud on the outside in Mansour Delane, who came over from Virginia Tech and was a first-team All-American for LSU. This was very much, despite all the bad things that happened to LSU this year, this was kind of the return of DBU this season in just about every way. And we always talk about, if you're in that spot, you're going to get picked on. And DJ Pickett this year didn't have a game in which he allowed more than 2 catches. He had obviously the coverage bust against Oklahoma. He was the one that was kind of considered most at fault for that. And it was a backbreaking play in that game. And if LSU were actually in contention for a national championship, it would be a really, really tough play to look back on. But we know that wasn't the case. That was also his first touchdown allowed in coverage this year. His first touchdown allowed in coverage of his college career that happened in the regular season finale. It was his first catch of 20 yards allowed since September, since the Ole Miss game. I mean, how is it possible that he is already this good?
It's nuts, man. It goes against physics. It really does. Like, I remember in the offseason when they were saying, hey, we're going to work you in kind of in the slot or in the nickel. I was thinking to myself, like, that's going to be really hard to do with a guy of that size. And that's kind of how he started a little bit. But yeah, he immediately started taking on these big challenges. And exactly what you said, being the guy opposite of Mansour Delane, where they know they don't want to go that way. So they're immediately going, oh, freshman, hey, freshman. And a guy that is so large that when he guesses wrong, you can see what happens in the Oklahoma game, where you kind of want a shorter player. It can be like running back in that way, where a low center of gravity makes it a lot easier to recover and flip your hips. And so the fact that he guesses incorrectly so rarely kind of goes to show that the size and speed is now an asset.
That's a great point, too, because there was definitely that point in that Oklahoma game where John Mateer just said, I'm so lost that I'm just going to hope that throwing at a freshman corner is going to work out for me. Maybe he does that in practice sometimes with Cortland Guillory, and maybe it works out for him. And instead he throws it, and DJ Pickett is just like, oh, well, that was the easiest interception ever. Thank you, John Mateer, for doing that. You can't do that to him. You just can't. He should have been all SEC. He's only not all SEC because he's a freshman.
And because LSU's Barcelona. Like, let's be honest. Like, Delane should win more awards than he is, and that's LSU's fault. So I can't even really be any type of upset about it, because it's like, hey, if LSU had even 1 or potentially 2 more wins, these would be locks. So, you create your own destiny in this game.
This is a conversation that Pickett is included in, Will, but I came up with the list of the top 7 underclassmen in the SEC that need to be retained by new coaches in the SEC. And I didn't want to include upperclassmen in this because they can just go to the NFL draft. I wanted to focus on the guys who could either stay with their new head coach or transfer somewhere else. They would be the most devastating guys to watch walk out that door for their respective teams. None of these guys are draft eligible yet, and some of them still have the same coordinator, so their odds of staying are a lot better, obviously. But here's what that list looks like.
Is a really big deal, I think, as well.
Yeah, position coach is a big deal, but like there are a couple of guys in this list who same coordinator, new head coach steps in, and they decide to retain their coordinator, so it'll be really beneficial. So here's the list. Dallas Wilson, which I could have gone with Vernell Brown. I realized he had more prolific numbers, but Dallas Wilson still ridiculous.
Both of them.
Yeah, probably should have just gone to Florida receiver in that number 7 spot. I had Deuce Knight at 6. I had Jaden Baugh at 5. Kejuan Lacey at 4. Xavier Atkins at 3. DJ Pickett at 2. And Cam Coleman at 1. That was my list. And again, like Atkins at Auburn with Alex Golesh being able to retain DJ Durkin, DJ Pickett at LSU, Lane Kiffin being able to retain Blake Baker, you would think that's going to bode very well. At this point, it would be really surprising if those guys left. But, I do think that if you're looking at this in terms of like what would be most devastating, the reason I didn't give Baugh and Lacey the 2 and 3 spots was because I think there's some positional value there. Pickett only being a freshman as opposed to those guys who could, in theory, leave for the NFL draft after next year. I think that matters a little bit. And I do think running back is just a bit more surroundings dependent. And as awesome as the likes of Baugh and Lacey were with working through contact, we love that stat, yards after first contact, missed tackles forced. They're both going to have new offensive coordinators with new schemes to figure out. Lacey's going to be really interesting because John David Baker, who was at East Carolina, he was at Ole Miss before that. He's coming back to Oxford to take over that offense after they had a top 15 rushing attack in terms of attempts per game, rushing touchdowns. But the question that everybody's going to be asking with Lacey is, does he follow Lane to LSU? Or is he perhaps, if you've seen a couple of the social media posts, maybe not as thrilled with Lane right now, and maybe he's a little bit more entrenched to stay at Ole Miss? We'll see.
Yeah, and the reason why I make the position coaches comp is a lot of those guys, you spend most of your time with your position coaches, right? So like letting a Billy Gonzalez go at Florida, I don't know on that level, right? But like, as your interim head coach, and you had 2 awesome freshman wide receivers, and he's been there forever. That was a little bit of a head scratching move. I understand. Like again, I trust Summerall more than anybody to build a staff. So like, don't get me wrong there. But it feels like hey, keep a guy for a year and you keep these 2 receivers because they know them and he was the interim head coach and there's zero bad blood there. Seems like a good move, right? And then like Pickett, keeping the father of DBU, Corey Raymond, I think is a really big deal. Jaden Baugh, I don't know how connected he was to Jabbar Jaluk, but he's gone. So I think that is something that I want to key in on going forward is how much does a position coach leaving affect the guy transferring? Because that's who's in their ear every day. That's who you're in the meeting rooms with. That's who, maybe not exactly who you recruited you, but who you very quickly were introduced with and kind of given your little kingdom. And so I think that can be kind of sneaky. And we see some of the guys like Ole Miss getting that big National Signing Day flip based on you brought in the receiver, I think Moncrief, that used to play at Ole Miss, who's like related to this guy. So I think a lot of those like day-to-day coaches, I don't think they're promising anything because that's tampering, but I think it's a lot easier to go, hey, our coaching staff is kind of in disarray, because that's what we're talking about here. We're not really, there's no Alabama guys on here, you know what I'm saying? So we're talking about, is your team not exactly going as you plan? Keeping a guy versus not could really come down to, is the person who brought them there still with the staff?
Yeah, it's a good point. And I think there might be a different perspective if you are entering your pre-draft season as opposed to entering year 2, and you look at it as what's going to be the best scheme for me. Do I feel like this new coordinator like is going to be one that I could thrive in, is going to set me up for success at the NFL level? And that'll be interesting to see with Baugh after he loses his position coach. Buster Faulkner is coming in there, and we know Georgia Tech had prolific rushing attacks during the time that he was there.
And that's the thing too, you could upgrade, because at the end of the day, it's like, hey, I know you got some rushing yards. Your position coach also will not slap a guy, and he was at Georgia Tech, and he was awesome last year, and he has a proven track record. So sometimes bringing a guy in could help you.
Yeah, it's going to be about scheme. I think for someone like Baugh specifically, where like Georgia Tech ran a lot of these gap design runs. Baugh has been a little bit more of a zone runner. That stuff does matter with running back. And Cole brought up a great example of like Tank Bigsby and his transition, and it was just not necessarily a difficult thing for him to be able to process. It might have hurt him in his pre-draft season when they shifted that offense. But Andy Staples had the quote from John Summerall about how he was watching the Florida State-Florida game, and Summerall said, "Hey, can we give the ball to number 13 10 more times?" Wild thing to say about a guy who got the ball 38 times in that game. I would guess that John Summerall is going to prioritize keeping Jaden Baugh. We said, look, Florida's a total gut job, but you've got Jaden Baugh, and at least that's good. Hopefully he stays in that offense. And we kind of look at it. If Hardy returns at Mizzou, which I assume that's going to be the case, there's a chance that the SEC returns the best 3 running backs in college football. There's a real chance at that. Some are already saying return of the back, 2026.
Oh my God. Yeah, I mean, that would be awesome. And we talked about this with Mizzou specifically, man, where I was like, hey, there is a true fork in the road right now for Drink. And I know, like I said, people don't like Drink, whatever. Maybe he's a little corny, but he's completely turned Mizzou around. And I said, this was the fork in the road. Either you're going to stay at Mizzou, and you have a lot of guys that I think you can convince to come back. You have a lot of local
Yes, you
recruits that
do.
you brought in. There's some real talent on that team, and it's not just talent, it's young talent. This was certainly a reset year for them. Certainly, Prabula got hurt when he came back. He wasn't great, but I don't think anybody was expecting Mizzou to win 11, 12 games this year. And it was all kind of coming off of the rebuild from the Brady Cook, era with Burden and all those guys. I feel like they are really poised to return a ton of guys. You hit on this, and it's like they've been doing well enough in recruiting and what they've landed just the local talent, which is enough at Mizzou. They've been able to develop some guys. They've been able to hit on the portal guys. So I actually think, and I'm going to kind of keep banging the drum for Mizzou being one of the more talented teams in the SEC overall.
Hardy, Lacey, Baugh. If you had your choice, build an offense around one of those guys, who would you go with?
Gosh, man, it's a really good question. It's a really, really good question.
I'm going to go back and forth on it, I think, throughout the offseason. Because every time I see something like Lacey ended up having the most missed tackles forced.
Yeah.
Hardy ended up with the most yards after first contact. And then Baugh is just like, he's just a dude, man. Like he is just so fun to watch in some of these games. And when they just decide, screw it, he's just going to have 25, 30 carries in a game. He's kind of in that spot, but I could go back and forth. There's not a bad option, but it's going to be a fun conversation to have in the offseason.
Man, and here's what it is, because this really is not like wasting time. I think that you almost part of you wants to go, Ole Miss is going to find that guy, or Lane Kiffin's going to find that guy. They've had the Snoops, they've had all these different guys over time, but that you just hit on is so key, because you could say, oh, he's a product of the offense. Why is he forcing more missed tackles? Why in space is he a little bit more dominant? And then with Baugh, he didn't get the reps until the back half of the year. If he had gotten the carries that the other two got, what would it be like? I think the easy answer, or the safe answer, is Hardy.
I agree.
Especially when you think about his quarterback went down and he kept balling, especially when you think about what he was able to do in the matchups, with some of these bigger teams. I know he wasn't great every game, but he really was able to strike fear even in Alabama, and he kind of didn't get the rock in the second half. So I think that's 1A right now. But I think if you're any of these three teams, you think, okay, we're good, especially if you get Baugh coming back with Buster Faulkner.
Ooh, yeah. Ooh. That'd be fun to watch. Would be really, really fun to watch. Will, I did not have DJ Lagway on that list.
I was about to say that. I was going to say next. Now, why is that?
I don't know for certain that Buster Faulkner wants to build his offense around that. I think it's so difficult to figure it out. If you're looking at him on film this year and knowing that there is a really strong chance that he's never going to be fully healthy. How many conversations we have about DJ Lagway's health this year? And there's always something. We know how Haynes King was used in the Georgia Tech offense. He was a durable battering ram. And I'm not saying that Buster Faulkner would come in and expect DJ Lagway to be used like that or anything like that. But
the problem, folks, is that DJ Lagway, I think, would expect DJ Lagway to be used that way. I think that's where the problems start. I think he would be like, all right, coach, I'll be your next Haynes King. And Faulkner, I don't know.
Yeah, it's like, dude, you've got a separated shoulder. You kind of, you're in a walking boot after every game. This is not really.
I ain't hear no belt. DJ, can you just sit down, man? We got to back up for this.
DJ, we need to actually perform surgery on you. We can't just rehab this and hope that it heals. He had 19 turnover-worthy plays this year, Will. And he averaged 6.7 yards per attempt. That's basura. That's terrible. And I know that you are always going to look at a player of his talent and you could put together a really good 5-minute sample size of, oh my God, build around him and figure everything else out later. And take the good with the bad with Lagway. And there's a real case to be made for that. But I don't know that if I'm Buster Faulkner, I'm going all in on him. And if there are other options available in the portal that you think could fit what you want to do better, I'm not going to poo-poo that. I'm really not going to. And so that's why I didn't have him at 7, where those other 7 guys, and I'll include Vernell Brown in that. So I guess that's 8 guys. Those guys, if they walk out that door, that's devastating. And the teams who lose them are going to feel like, oh my gosh, that's going to be really tough to replace. I don't know that it would be universal opinion that Florida would feel that way if Lagway left.
Can I have an insane take that I want to just warm up here?
Fire away.
I think that DJ Lagway is perfect for the Josh Heupel offense.
Now that's interesting.
I think that if he goes to Tennessee, That is going to be the best version of him because that offense needs that arm strength. We've seen that. He is just mobile enough. Their offensive line has been good. They're adding receivers. The run game has always been strong,
Their
and they call
quarterbacks don't
one
get
plays.
killed too because they play with so much tempo.
I
Yeah.
think that his exact one read, like
Mm.
sip, I think that would be poetry in motion.
Lagway has been very loyal. He's been very loyal to Florida. He was loyal, perhaps to a fault, to Billy Napier. It would be a much different scheme for him to learn. I don't know that he would do that in terms of setting himself up for the NFL. I don't know if he's thinking like that. I really don't. But the Lagway conversation is just more complicated than any of us thought it was going to be because of what we saw from him this year. And they were kind of at their best when they just turned it over to Jaden Baugh. You know, they were. And
Yeah.
I just don't know that that's a certainty with how this is going to play out of Florida.
I agree, and that style of offense, I'm fascinated to see. I wish the gentleman whose name I'm not even going to try to pronounce, that's out in Berkeley, California, I wish he had not already said that he was going to stay. Maybe that's before these new SEC head coaches came knocking on the door, but I think that's a guy who would have been interesting in a lot of new systems, LSU's, Florida's. So if you have that style of offense that Summerall's trying to run, you just go for a different style of quarterback, and I wonder what the top of that looks like, you know?
Sam Levitt in a Buster Faulkner offense. That's interesting.
That's a guy that could. Yeah, I think he could fit at LSU. I think he could fit Florida. I think he could fit at USC maybe. You know, that's a guy that could really shape college football next year.
It's going to be a lot of these guys when that portal opens. And by the way, January 2nd to 16th, I said 15th the other day. I was thinking 15 days in my mind and confused those two things. So that's going to be fascinating. You're already seeing guys who, when they announce their intentions to go into the portal, that's what that means. Tampering has already started. Of course it has. So the market's going to be very, very fluid with a lot of these guys. And maybe Florida's going to take a long, hard look at the transfer portal market. Speaking of quarterbacks who could, in theory, enter the portal, Deuce Knight. He's the lone quarterback that I had on that list. Odd to have someone with 0 snaps against power conference competition is, you know, hey, got to retain him. And it was Mercer that he, you know, set the world on fire. The Deuce was loose against Mercer. It's still a former 5-star guy who could be electric in the right offense. And you saw bits and pieces of that. You know, Auburn fans are like, hey, we started the wrong guy this year. The question is if he sees himself in Alex Golesh's offense and if Alex Golesh sees Deuce Knight in his offense. How Golesh plays this is going to be pivotal because you might be tasked with going all in on him or the alternative option being like bring in Byron Brown from USF. Everybody's already connected those dots. Brown has 1 more year of eligibility. He knows the offense already. I don't know how realistic it would be for Golesh to thread the needle and to get Brown to come over to Auburn for 1 year and to keep Deuce Knight. That's a lot of money to spend on quarterback when you've got some pretty key areas of that offense, especially, you know, in the trenches offensive line that you're going to have to spend some money on. I don't know how that's going to work. Deuce Knight's got 4 years of eligibility too. So that's really attractive to somebody that's recruiting him out of the portal. Not an easy decision, but it's one that I think Auburn fans, if they watch Deuce Knight transfer elsewhere, they'd be like, oh my God, they're always going to wonder what if.
You know, Auburn might be the only team in history. This just goes to show kind of how dysfunctional they were that could make an argument they started their own quarterback and it was 2 different quarterbacks. You know, because when Ashton Daniels come out, you go, hey, this guy's better than Jackson Arnold. And then Deuce Knight comes out, and you go, this guy might be the best quarterback they got. They might have messed this up twice, but they did preserve their red shirt to your fault or to your point, which in a season
for both guys too, for Daniels as well. And that was why he didn't ultimately start in that Mercer game.
Yeah, no. So you end up kind of, you know, I don't know, again, to your point, like, I think if you have a guy like Knight in the building, you just go, all right, so you want 2 lockers, you want like a weapon X locker, like what do you want? You want no quarterbacks on the roster? You want the punter to be your backup? I think you just got to do that because that's your clearest path forward, you know? So guys are different. Like some guys would be like, hey, bringing in that extra competition would help me. You know, some guys would say, hey, I'm mobile. I don't want to be in a position where if I get hit, you got a guy waiting in the wings. So yeah, I think it's just whatever he wants. If I'm Golesh, because it's easier to keep a 5-star quarterback than to go get another one and get him in the system.
The challenge too is what do your receivers want? Because man, Cam Coleman's number 1 on my list. He's number 1 on my list. It is criminal to think about the quarterback play that he's been saddled with. My favorite Cam Coleman fact is he played the majority of this season with a quarterback who refused to take downfield shots, and he still finished second in the SEC with 10 catches of 20 yards downfield, which is just insane. I mean, I want that guy to play in a great offense. And I know I've already thrown out there the idea of what would it look like for Cam Coleman to pair up with Arch Manning. That fit would make a lot of sense. Maybe the best fit will be at Auburn. Maybe that is ultimately where we could see the best version of him. The last time that Alex Golesh was an SEC play caller, friend of the show, Jalen Hyatt, won the Blitnikoff. He can sell that. He has had 4,000-yard receivers during his time as an offensive play caller, which goes back to 2020, I guess, with Heupel at UCF, and then obviously what he was able to do at Tennessee. And he's, of course, going to a place, Auburn, that has not had a 1,000-yard receiver since Ronnie Daniels in 1999. I think Coleman could go anywhere, play, dominate, game-changing player, change the entire way that defenses defend you because you have Cam Coleman on your team. He's saying George Pickens. That's
like dry water. You can't have say George Pickens.
I know,
what
you can't.
George Pickens
so he's not George Pickens then, right? But he is saying George Pickens. That's who he reminds me of. God, he's so freaking good. But that's number one. Any disagreement with that list? Would you have had Pickett at number one instead of Coleman?
No, I think Cam Coleman. Again, it just goes down to how much a guy matters, right? I think that a number one receiver, you could treat them like a Michael Thomas. You could truly target them on every play, and we've seen guys kind of do that. That's what Marvin Harrison Jr. essentially was when he was at Ohio State, right? And so, whereas a corner, like we just talked about, you could target the other side of the field if you just have one good corner. I mean, how many Jets teams were like, okay, whoever's opposite of Rios, good luck or whatever. So yeah, I think it comes down to positional value, but I think that one thing about Auburn, like I said, Auburn, there's a list of teams in my mind. I know everybody doesn't listen to every episode. There's a list of teams in my mind that I feel way better making fun of, that I don't feel like I'm punching down. Auburn will forever be a team that I'm fine making fun of because they have the money. So if Cam Coleman wants money, he can stay at Auburn. I think it comes down to, let's get Deuce Knight, let's get Cam Coleman in a room, let's get this new offensive coordinator from UCF in a room and say, USF, woo, big difference, and say, hey, what do you guys want to do? You want to play some schoolyard ball? You want to do 5 Mississippi Rush? You want to run the triple option? Because we got two guys I think we could win with. And it's going to take us building out of the portal. Next year, we'll worry about next year. For this year, I think we can at least win 7-8 games just using these two gentlemen. Just first read Cam Coleman, second read Legs.
There is a realistic path for Auburn to make some tweaks to this roster and have me thinking 8-4 is very realistic year one. Alex Golesh. Again, portal's going to determine a lot of that. Health is going to determine a lot of that. This quarterback situation, very fluid. But the more you kind of think about the pieces that they already have in place, and Xavier Atkins is a guy that I admittedly have not talked about enough on this show, but like 17 TFLs this season, 9.5 sacks, I think he finished with, and has just been a menace. Keldrick Falk was the guy that we were talking about coming in. He's still going to be probably a first-round pick, but Atkins is the guy that's emerged as, oh my God, like he's just everywhere on that defense. He's kind of been like the SEC's version of Jacob Rodriguez in a lot of different ways, but the things that they can do year one, if they're able to retain some of these guys, a huge if. I just listed 3 guys for Auburn among that 7. If all of a sudden we're talking about all these guys that they have coming back, you could look up and go, that's a year one situation that's not nearly as bad as it could have been. Again, we'll monitor that situation.
Yeah, well, Alex Atkins, Brian Kelly survivor. He got up out of Baton Rouge and immediately flourished. And at the time, I said, hey.
Xavier Atkins, not Alex Atkins.
Sorry, what did I call him?
Alex Atkins. You combined Alex Golesh with Xavier Atkins. I know what you did there.
Yeah. So Xavier Atkins, Brian Kelly survivor. He's the guy that transferred, and I immediately said, hey, got so many good linebackers, doesn't matter. Right. And then weeks goes down, and you go,
it'd be nice to have Xavier Atkins.
They're not exactly the same role, obviously, but kind of key steps up, he's not as effective, and it's like, we would have found the spot for you. So, I think Auburn, like we just said, I don't feel sorry for Auburn because they have so many dudes. They have good offensive lines, some pieces coming back. So, literally, a couple tweaks here and there, and you suddenly go, oh, yeah, that guy was a 4+ star recruit,
Yeah. If they make the right moves in the portal, I'm not saying like that they should expect to go out there and get a Mansour Delane or somebody like that, but they're like a couple of key guys away from all of a sudden being really interesting next year. Will, can we talk about some SEC coordinator changes?
Absolutely.
Yeah, there's a lot of these that have happened over the course of the last week. We hit on it a little bit with Faulkner, Florida, with Baker at Ole Miss. Josh Heupel fired Tim Banks. I didn't realize this, and this is something we would have surely brought up on this show repeatedly if we had known this stat. That's the first time that Josh Heupel has fired an assistant in his 8 seasons as a head coach. That is Pat Fitzgerald, Kirk Ferentz stuff. That's crazy.
He's so sweet, dude. He is the most unlike an SEC. Imagine getting fired by Josh Heupel. Like, you just walk in his office, or you walk in his office, it's like, you know why you're here. You know you got to get out of here, man. I'm sorry.
I think Josh Heupel is really good at like he's a lot different with raising his voice in private versus in public. There are some coaches who just do not care about that whatsoever, and they'll let it fly. They will blast an assistant, and they don't have anything to worry about. And Heupel is a little bit more like, I'm going to pick my spots with this, but I'm sure when he does bring it in those instances, which there were probably a few of those this year with Tim Banks, he really brings it. But man, I don't know if there are, I can't think of any other times where an SEC head coach has gotten to the end of year 5 and then he was firing an assistant for the first time. Like, I'm sure it happened in the 20th century a bunch, but that seems wild, doesn't it?
That's incredibly nuts. And I mean, considering too that, like, comes from UCF, have a lot of the questions that we've seen kind of all over, like some of the Billy Napier versus Summerall stuff that I hit on, where it's like, are you going to bring your homies? Are you going to bring your guys from UCF? Well, the guys from UCF were good. That's the thing. He brought some of the guys over, and they worked out great at Tennessee, got other jobs, talking about Golish and stuff like that. And so that being said, like, it worked out
Banks
for him.
wasn't one of them. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. That's actually another crazy part of it too. How long does a guy like that survive? So that's probably worth when we get into the offseason, SDS Pod investigates, because how often do the corners just get scapegoated? Yeah, I think Tim Banks honestly was kind of that situation. We loved him through 4 of those years. And then suddenly things go south. 2 corners get hurt for pretty much the entire year. I mean, that's most of the time when guys get fired. It's like, you're here for a reason, right? And then something goes south, and we got to have a reason why it wasn't my fault.
It was bad this year, man. It was bad. Like, he's Bros Award finalist last year for a defensive focused playoff team. And it was a remarkable 2-year stretch. We talked about that, how much heavy lifting they did. But a year later to get fired, you're only getting fired like that if it's bad. And it was, like you look back at some of the numbers this year. They're 92nd in scoring defense, 84th in opposing third down conversion rate. They were 115th in the country against the pass. But the most damning is that they were 129th in FBS and opposing red zone TD percentage. That's brutal, man.
That's really, because that's just communication. That's cat defense in the red zone oftentimes, where it's like, you go get that guy, you go play zone, you play, oh, nope, you were in man, I was in zone.
Yeah, like that's, if you, Tennessee at different points has been bend don't break. That's not bend don't break at all. You can get away with that if you're a team like Oregon. Like, Oregon's opposing red zone TD percentage is like 75%, but they only let a team get into the red zone 2 times in a game. And so they can kind of survive that. Tennessee's allowing 3 to 4 red zone trips per game, and there's just no confidence that they can get that stop in those key areas. So a tough decision, I'm sure it had to be for Josh Heupel to make. A lot of smoke surrounding Ryan Walters. They worked together when they were both at Mizzou. Ryan Walters stayed on that first Eli Drinkwitz staff at Mizzou, Illinois. Then he ends up getting the Purdue job. He's at Washington now. He's kind of been a bit all over the place, but it seems to be like that's the most obvious candidate there. Whatever the case, if I'm a Tennessee fan, I am relieved to see that is no longer something that you can say about Josh Heupel, that he's never fired an assistant. I am relieved to see he senses this urgency going into year 6, because this team needed changes. His offense had all the reason to be in the toilet, which we've talked about. And instead you look up and you're like, I know the defense had injuries. Okay. Like it still had some dudes on that defense. Like, Hood is going to be a 1st-round pick. Like they still had guys there on that side of the ball. And the defense surrendered 26 points in 8 of their 12 games. They lost 3 home games, which they never do that. They lost 3 home games while averaging 38 points allowed. If you take away the non-offensive scores, it's 38 points. It was a tough watch, this Tennessee defense this year. And so if you're Josh Heupel, you're kind of looking at it going, man, Jobs aren't guaranteed in perpetuity. And Tim Banks, as great as he's been, as great of a hire as he's been, taking a job that seemingly nobody wanted, at least that's what it kind of felt like when Josh Heupel came on board. This is just kind of the nature of this business.
Yeah, and I mean, too, the thing that might have all of that certainly is like why he got fired, but the straw for him might have been that Kentucky game, which is so funny because boy, howdy did they get
Man,
shredded by Kentucky, and they won the game comfortably. But you're looking, going, this guy, this freshman quarterback, just broke that record. Like we can't even stop the bad teams, dog.
you're right. That's probably the first time it really entered Josh Heupel's mindset of like, I think I'm going to have a real decision to make on him at the end of the season. And then Diego Pavia, once again, he broke somebody. If they win that game 24-17, I think Tim Banks still has a job.
Yeah.
But instead, they lose that game 45-24, and they can't stop Pavia late. And Pavia is just dancing all over Neyland, and just makes himself comfortable. That was the nail in the coffin for sure.
Yeah. And I'll say really quick, man, I've talked about so much floor raising in the 12 team, and now we might end up with 30 teams by the time we finish doing this podcast, Connor. In the 12 team playoff era, floor raising is such a big deal because, to be honest, if you're Tennessee, I know you have championship expectations every year, but if you get in, with 2 losses, and let's say you match up with Oregon and you beat them or something, I think it's a great season, in this era, right? Where you host a home playoff game, or you get a bye or whatever, you could win a first round game against the right team and feel like you had a great season. And so that just goes to show how perfect this hire was for Tennessee. And when that happened, I'd watched him a ton. It was like the first thing I ever talked about in here, where I said, hey, there's more talented teams in the SEC could figure out this offense. And Georgia has. I wasn't wrong, right? But at the same time, how many Georgias are in college football? How many guys can really look at you and man you up and go, you're not beating me with this offense? And so I think that's such a testament to, I would say Tennessee was the pinnacle of chaos when Heupel got there. They were changing out head coaches every couple of years, administrators, let alone coordinators. So the fact that they were able to keep these guys as long as they did just goes to show how great of a coach Heupel is.
Yeah, it's pretty wild to think that this was the first big time firing that he had to make. And who knows? We'll see what this Tennessee offense looks like, or this Tennessee defense rather looks like moving forward. Other big coordinator changes. South Carolina hired Kendall Briles. How about that? Very interesting. This is going to be the hire that defines Shane Beamer's rest of tenure at South Carolina. He essentially said, we can't mess around anymore. We can't hope that this guy, because he's got this NFL background, is going to work with this quarter. Like, no. Didn't worry about implementing a new offense, because that's what he's going to do. That's what Kendall Briles is brought in to do at South Carolina. Shane Beamer said, we need to be far more efficient. That's what this comes down to. And while Briles, I would not say is some tier 1 offensive coordinator in the sport, he's been extremely efficient as an OC in the 2020s with Arkansas, and then the last 3 years as Sonny Dykes' OC. He took over for Garrett Riley at TCU after Garrett Riley left for Clemson. South Carolina started the Beamer era with Marcus Satterfield, who infamously didn't know how important yards per play was as a metric. He had no idea what was good, what was not good. Gamecocks in that area under Beamer have finished 96th in FBS, then 45th, 77th, 57th, 95th. This will be Beamer's 4th OC, if we're including Dal Loggins, Mike Shula, and they finally have a guy who at least understands the significance of offensive efficiency. Briles in that same stretch, both at Arkansas and TCU, never finished worse than 43rd in the country in yards per play. So basically, Briles' worst mark in that stretch is better than South Carolina's best. I'm sure that was really attractive to Shane Beamer. I don't know what it ultimately means for Sellers' future, because no matter what, he was going to have a 3rd different OC in as many seasons. If he decided to stay in college, he's going to have obviously a new OC if he goes to the NFL. It's air raid, it's up tempo, it's nothing under center. Shane Beamer is clearly more focused on trying to produce a good offense rather than just trying to appease Lenore Sellers. If he can check both of those boxes, he would take it. But this wasn't necessarily about, I need to find the exact right guy that's going to set up Lenore Sellers for success in the NFL. Shane Beamer is like, I need to score points. I need to score points here. And if that's with Lenore Sellers running this offense, great. And if it's not, I need to be able to prepare for that as well, because there's a good chance that, hey, in the next day, we could hop off this recording, and Lenore Sellers could be announcing that he's going to the NFL. That could be on the table, but if you're Beamer, you needed to get someone in there that just has somewhat of a proof of concept in the SEC, running his offense, someone that's more proven as a play caller than the two previous guys that you've had, and you're able to get that. And so in that way, it's at least a win. Will it be enough of a win to turn around the trajectory of this South Carolina offense? TBD.
Yeah, I mean, I think in 2025, or I guess 2026 now, right? My final metric, if I'm interviewing an offensive coordinator, is I'm going to say, hey, toss me your phone really quick. I'm going to open pff.com. And if autofill comes on, that's a check mark. It's a red flag if you're like, I don't know what EPA is actually. Like you don't have to do everything. I'm not saying trust the numbers, be, a binder guy who just does what it says. Like a lot of it still is feel and calling a game and installs in 2 minutes and all that. But if you just have no concept of what advanced metrics are, you can't be a coordinator in my offense at this point, because it's just having all the tools at your disposal, not putting your head in the sand, as Mike Shula, like you said, often did. So I think that hiring a guy that has adapted in certain ways, I think that TCU, I was actually just thinking about this hire, and it's so weird how that first year under Sonny Dykes was just, like they were seen as this job that was like, oh my gosh, like they had Garrett Riley for a second. Like they were supposed to be kind of the class of the Big 12. They were
Won
kind
the
of
Rose
supposed
Award
to be,
that year.
yeah,
When they went
he
to a
sure
national
did.
championship. Yeah.
He sure did. And they were supposed to be what I believe now Texas Tech is ultimately going to be, which is kind of the team in the new Big 12 that is able to say, hey, we're going to plant a flag and we're going to do this. So I think this is one of those guys that was the final kind of holdover from that era of like, we have the juice, like come here and maybe play for a national championship, because they participated in a national championship not too long ago. Did they show up? I don't know. But yeah, I think that it's the only reason why you wouldn't like Kendall Briles is the off the field stuff. And we just live in a post shame society now. DJ Durkin is retained by a staff. So I think that any hand wringing that you do in the game of college football or pro coaching, I wish that we were a more moral society, but we're not. It's about wins and losses. So I think those would be your reservations, and it is what it is,
Shane Bieber didn't make that hire to win a press conference. He made a hire to try and score points. And that's ultimately what his tenure is going to come down to. So South Carolina going in a very different direction. There was maybe a little bit of speculation that Baker could end up there after he ultimately decides that he's going to be going to Ole Miss. So what this is going to look like as it relates to Sellers, that's obviously very high on that priority list. But at the very least, if you lose Sellers, you can recruit to that scheme, and you have at least proven that you have somebody that's got an established identity, and you can go out and say, this is a guy that fits in our scheme. This is not necessarily a guy that fits in our scheme. And you can go out and make whatever that next move is going to be.
Yeah, and to your point, really quick, you talked about guys to retain, and we left off guys that could go to the draft. Sellers is in such a unique position because, I mean, there is a world where, okay, you go to, Myrtle Beach and there's a yacht called Buy or Sellers, and they put in millions of dollars to keep him around. Or there's a reality where he goes, you know what, maybe I actually don't have to transfer. Maybe my grades are such that I'm just making an easy decision and leaving and not breaking anybody's hearts and going wherever. So, yeah.
Really don't know where he ends up. Really don't know, but it'll be interesting. Okay, so speaking of Briles and speaking of new SEC coordinators, let's close with this one, Will. Briles, his brother-in-law, which something we used to talk about, is Jeff Lebby.
I'm sorry. The reading that brought me over the edge about the shame thing, because it's funny that Kendall Briles has the stink on him, but Jeff Lebby, who is part of the staff, is part of the Briles family, just doesn't have the last name. That's how stupid we are. As we go, that guy seems cool. You come in, you don't get any shame for the Briles situation.
Yeah. There was definitely some parts of that Lebby was. Like you could Google it and see some things that Lebby was
people don't
was linked
Google
to
stuff.
as well.
That's exactly my point, Connor. We knew that, but regular people don't care.
That's true. So those guys technically related in-laws, and Lebby made a very bold coordinator switch. Zach Arnett is back in Starkville. How about that? Time heals all wounds, even when time isn't very long. Will, I was getting ready to board my flight to Atlanta on Saturday morning when I saw this, and I immediately sent the Pete Thamel tweet to you because I had to make sure it wasn't made up. I was like kind of groggy on Saturday morning, like you're just waking up, you're like, wait, what? Did you have the same reaction that I did?
Yeah, you saw what I texted, which was like, that guy they fired looks a lot like Zach Arnett. That is Zach Arnett. Why is he in the graphic?
You're right. That is Zach Arnett. Coleman Hutzler was fired after his second year there.
I know he had a beard. Was it like anyway?
Yeah. Go figure that Zach Arnett wasn't even the most noteworthy fired head coach who returned to join his successor staff that was announced on Saturday. Yeah, that's just a couple of caveats there, because James Franklin hired Brent Pry to be his defensive coordinator. Like, the guy that they fired earlier in the season, he's like, so like, you like Blacksburg. You don't want to really move. Moving is the single worst thing that we as human beings do on a regular basis. Just stay, keep the family here, run my defense, just like you did for all those years at Penn State, just like for all those years you did at Vandy. Just stick around, man. Like, your key card still works. Stay here. Wild. Absolutely. Can't believe that Brent Pry was able to like actually be willing to do that. No sort of ego trip of like, I just got demoted and my successor said, what you come on, let me run things around here. He's probably clearing out his office.
Dude, next time you get like a coordinator on, could you ask them, like, do they have like Outlook and like org charts and stuff? Like, do they use Microsoft Teams? Because I kind of wonder, like,
I hope not. I hate Teams. It's the worst,
buddy. And so it's better than the alternative. I'm learning, because everybody at the company I'm at now texts, and that drives me insane. Anyway, I wonder if like you get a new employee number if you're in that situation. You get new healthcare. Like, I wonder if they treat you like you're a copy of yourself, or if they just move you over in an org chart, or how that works.
Does he? Yeah, he has to get a different office. There's one office for the head coach. Franklin now gets it. How does all of that stuff work? Like, did he have to get rid of all of his Virginia Tech stuff and now he gets it back? Like, how does that all go down? Because that's different than the Arnett situation, where Arnett's at least had jobs in between. Like, he did the analyst thing the last couple of years, did the analyst thing at Ole Miss. Initially, he was going to be the defense coordinator for Dan Mullen at UNLV. Decides, I'm going to do the analyst thing at Florida State. I'm not going to pretend to know what went into that decision.
Dan Mullen, by the way, most moral guy at this head coaching search, because he said 3 months ago he wouldn't go anywhere. I don't think he took an interview.
Yeah, and I remember I was talking about Kentucky candidates, and I said, no, I think Mullen is like pretty locked in on staying at UNLV for multiple years there. But with Arnett, I talked to someone pretty close to the situation on Saturday, and as weird as this move is, to understand, Zach Arnett fired as Mississippi State head coach after one season, technically in that role, had been the DC beforehand, but fired after 1 year, and then to be coming back 2 years later as a defensive coordinator, like, that's just very, very rare. And I did, up until James Franklin made that move, I was like, how many times have we ever seen a guy join his successor's staff as an assistant? Because that is ultimately what he is doing. Jeff Lebby replaced Zach Arnett as a head coach at Mississippi State. But what I found out is, like, there's no bad blood there. Clearly, this move doesn't happen if there's that sense of bad blood. You talk to some former coaches, like, anytime we've had Jeff Collins on this show, he ain't saying Georgia Tech. Like, there's no love lost there. Jeff Collins and Georgia Tech, they're not having a kumbaya anytime soon. There's a lot of bad blood usually when a coach gets fired, okay? And I give Jeff Lebby a lot of credit, because he looked at his team critically. He recognized that a 3-win improvement for his team probably should have been a 4 or 5-win improvement, and their defense let him down in some key moments. Some decision-making that Lebby had let them down, and they needed to get some more experience there, especially on the defensive side of the ball. And so Lebby threw out this idea and was like, hey, who could immediately jumpstart our defense, give us a shot in the arm next year, and who would run through a wall to have this job? And Zach Arnett ends up being that guy. And, you know, this is something I've never said before, but it needs to be said as it relates to this context. Zach Arnett wasn't ready to be a head coach, and he knew he wasn't ready to be a head coach. He just wants to run defenses. Like, that is what he is wired at this stage of his life to do. And you would say, Connor, why did he take the job then? Why did he take the job to become Mississippi State's head coach post Mike Leach's death? I cannot emphasize enough that you never expect an active head coach to die.
I mean, that's like no human should ever fault him for accepting that job. And I don't even think we should fault Mississippi State for offering it to him, just given all the circumstances. it's tragic that it didn't work out, but at the same time, it's it's a tragic situation. It's the least tragic thing that happened in that situation.
You're not at a, like you want to retain what you have. It's different if they had been 5-7 that year, but they were a 9-win team, and they beat Illinois in the bowl game. I remember being there at the bowl game, and they wanted to try and keep this thing intact. And you're just looking for things when a tragedy like that occurs to kind of keep that core in place. And it's a very sensitive situation. Arnett wants to do right by the players, and the players already like him a lot, and they had a good thing going with their defense. So it made sense at the time, but ultimately he wasn't ready for it. And Arnett's always been really candid about his resume and how unique it was that he basically had like 2 places that he had been before getting an SEC head coaching job, which does not happen ever. And he admitted he felt guilty at times that he'd only had this in his background. But nonetheless, after all of this, the Arnett Rocky Long defense, whatever you want to call it, their version of the 3-3-5 returns to Starkville. If you could have told someone in 2022, hey, pair a Jeff Lebby offense with a Zach Arnett defense, like, that's a pretty good combination. That could work. And now Mississippi State's going to be able to get that in year 3 of the Lebby era.
And we've talked about it over and over again as far as, autonomy, right? Being with Mike Leach was perfect for him, right? And honestly, that defense was kind of built to stop a Mike Leach offense too. Well, now you got Levy, who's like, you know what, dude, kind of bleep off. I'm going to go do the offense, so you could go build whatever monstrosity you want on that end, and I won't interfere with you. And I do want to confirm, you're sure this was Levy's idea to bring him in?
Yes. This was not strong-armed. This was not a scenario in which, from what I was told, this was not a scenario in which Lebby had to be talked into this. And that's pretty remarkable. Like, that being able to sit there and be like, hey, the guy had my job before this. He could run a defense here. He built a real SEC defense here that did some good things during that year 2. I would argue they were still pretty good. And then year 3 was really when it kind of came to fruition.
See, the only hesitation, because I really do like him as a defensive coordinator. And to your point, I think there are essentially 2 kinds of defensive coordinators. There are like your scheme masterminds, like a Dave Aranda, and then you have like your vibes juice guys like a Pete Golding, right? And I think those are the exact 2 kinds of defensive coordinators. He so clearly is a Dave Aranda, like he so clearly is a guy who is a schematic genius, who is like not really, I don't think he was recruiting. Like, it is just 2 categories for DC. And so that being said, it's the only downside I would have is the Bobby Petrino with Arkansas last year, which is we bring in a guy who was head coach here. Well, if things go south for you, we know that guy can go to the press conferences.
He doesn't want to be a head coach yet.
That's the thing. It's actually, he's like an interim head coach. He doesn't want to go to the press conferences. That's a really good point, where he might survive Lebby if Lebby gets fired as the defensive coordinator, but not as the head coach. Whereas Petrino clearly wants to be a head coach. That's a really good distinction.
He doesn't think he has it in his personality at this stage of his career. It's not to say that'll be the case a couple years from now, 5 years from now, whatever the case may be. But everything that I've been told is that Arnett is still very much wired to be a defensive coordinator, to run that unit. And now he's going to get a chance to. So I'm excited to see what that looks like. A lot of really, really interesting coordinator moves in the SEC. Anything else that we should be discussing? That we covered a ton of ground in an hour here.
Yeah, I think a lot of it's playoff, like you talked about.
No playoff today. We'll leave that out of the conversation.
Yeah, I think, and you hit on this a little bit with Pry and the Franklin thing. I still think, the highest floor hires that were made, I think Franklin is number 1. I think they are good. That is going to be, could be the best hire for Virginia Tech.
Yeah, probably.
I think that Summerall, high floor hire, probably number 2. Lane is not a high floor hire, guys. He's a high ceiling hire. And so I look at kind of the staffs they're building. I love the Pry thing you just talked about. And you can kind of see almost immediately, how these staffs get built. Are guys arrogant, And so we've now seen in the modern NIL era what it looks like when it works, what it looks like when it does not. And I just hit on that with Summerall versus Napier, where we were trying to grab the ULL guys. We were not hiring the hot names on the market. We weren't interviewing those guys. So I think as your team, whoever you may be, listener, is bringing in coordinators, think like, what's the real motivation here? Is this the best guy that's on the market? Is this a guy who's fun to play golf with? How does this guy fit your personnel? Does this mean that you're going to try to re-recruit your guys? Or in like a DJ Lagway situation, are you probably going to move on and probably go with someone else? How it would be nice to have, but you would rather a guy who could take some hits, who could be a little bit more mobile. And I think this portal season is going to be absolute chaos. I'm not going to do the Mike Greenberg fixes baseball in the offseason thing. But I have a feeling that here's the thing. We need to accept that college football is going to be a fundamentally different sport year to year. And once you throw that out, you just got to write everything down that changes. And now you can compare team versus team because everyone's playing with the same set of cards. It's a lot like F1 in that way where the car regulations change every year. So you go, okay, well, now we have this many scholarships. Now we have this window. Now this date changed. So we had to recruit this way. And so I think this portal class is going to be so fascinating, going from 0 head coaches fired in the SEC, only a few coordinators, to open season. Oh, you recruited this guy in high school, but you were at Memphis and you knew he wasn't going to come to Memphis, so you just sent him Christmas cards. Well, he loved your office and he had a great connection with you, but he just wasn't going to go to Memphis and you knew that. Well, now he's at Arkansas. Now you got a new opportunity. So we're going to find like guys coming out of the woodwork and names that are going to pop for teams where you go, was that money? And then you look deep down and go, 10 years ago, he coached with that guy's dad. It's going to be awesome, man.
I'm looking forward to the chaos that's going to unfold with the portal. I care a lot more about the portal acquisitions now than I do, early signing period and all that stuff. And it's not to say that early signing period is meaningless, but I think you could look up and down the all SEC rosters to tie it all back to that. Look at the running backs and receivers, man. Like how many homegrown guys at running back and receiver made all SEC? Sean Bishop, that's one. What do we got? I'm trying to do this off the top of my head, but like those 3 running backs that we talked about earlier, those are all former transfers,
I mean, dude, yeah, going down, even like Caden Proctor, now a transfer because he came.
Technically, do we count Caden Proctor as a transfer?
He transferred from Alabama to Alabama.
Flirter, polygamist.
He was a hybrid work from home guy for a couple of weeks. He thought about it. He said, I kind of like it here. Anyway, let's not count Caden Proctor. Yeah, if you go all the way down, man. I mean,
a lot more in the trenches of guys that were at their their same school from the jump. But the skill positions, especially like running back and receiver. Yeah, even a Brennan Thompson, Brazzle is a transfer. I mean, there are so many of these guys that you just have been able to plug in and get key contributors playing at that level.
You know what's so crazy, dude? So many of these cute stories are going to be with the big teams. Like it's like, oh man, Colin Simmons did it the right way. And it's like, it's so funny because
non-transfer Colin Simmons. Yeah.
And it's like, we're going to go through the list and be like, oh, like, it used to be, okay, this guy stuck it out, even like kind of pre-portal era. It's like he went through 2 coaching changes and he finally got it. And it's like, oh, like the stories about our guy, why am I blanking on his name? The Bama quarterback last year, Bill Rowe, where it's like, oh, he was playing defensive back and he survived all this stuff. Now, like those stories are going to really, I feel, only kind of be with the bigger programs. Because if you're doing that at like, earmuffs, Kentucky or Mississippi State, right? If you're at one of those places, you probably just say, I'd rather start over somewhere else. And so it's kind of funny that the value of a ball coach, the value of like a Kirby Smart, talked about like a Pete Golding, a Summerall, where you go, hey, like your whole thing is not NIL. It's hitting people. It's building the culture. The stuff that we used to tune out and say it was stupid. Now it's like, those are the guys who are going to end up retaining a lot of their guys. And they're going to be these cute stories of, I grew up in this state and I've only played for this state, versus, hey, if you tried that at another place where you lose 5 or 6 games, you're playing another state.
Retention, really important. Really, really important over the course of the next couple of weeks. And why I wanted to be able to bring it up today and talk about it, because a lot of those key guys that I even mentioned, there's a lot of very important pieces that coaches are going to be having. They've already had these conversations with those guys, and what does it look like? Can you establish those relationships and be able to keep those guys on board? Could determine a lot of those year 1 ceilings and floors for that. All right, so let's kick it to Gary Stokan. Gary is one of the first guests that we have ever had on Saturday Down South podcast, and he is indeed retiring from his post as president and CEO of the Peach Bowl. So we discussed that. And always, we talk about the future of college football with the postseason and tweaks he would make. Somebody that's got a unique perspective on all of that. And we like to bring on unique perspectives. So here is Gary Stokan. For those of you who are not watching Saturday Down South podcast on YouTube and just our audio only, now would be a good time to go on YouTube and subscribe to Saturday Down South because we have all of our episodes are uploaded in full. If you like watching our individual game breakdowns, you're like, hey, you know what? 2 hour pod, that's really not for me. I really just kind of want to hear about my own team. That's fine. Saturday Down South on YouTube. We're going to have all of those matchup breakdowns. We do every single power conference game. We preview, we recap that involve the SEC. So we have so much content right now on Saturday Down South on YouTube. We have YouTube exclusive videos, and sometimes we'll do interviews that are just on Saturday Down South on YouTube. So definitely go subscribe. Please do that right now. I'm now excited to be joined by a very special guest. It is one of our OG guests on the Saturday Down South podcast. It is Gary Stokan. Gary, the retiring Gary Stokan. Weird to be able to say. Congratulations on a long career. But I got to start with this. Once the Peach Bowl concludes, we were just talking about how weird it is that it's such a late bowl game to not have a bowl game until the second weekend of January that we're talking about here. Once that concludes, what's the first thing that you will do in retirement?
Well, I'm blessed in that I don't retire until May 31st.
Ah,
And I don't call it a retirement because I looked up retirement in the dictionary and it said ceasing to work. And I've never worked a day in my life because for 47 years, I've done what I've loved to do. It's been a passion, whether it's been coaching or with Adidas and Converse, whether it's starting my own sports marketing company and doing that for 6 years and then going back to Adidas and putting together Kobe Bryant's first shoe and first advertising campaign and first global marketing campaign to now for the last 28 years running the sports council in the bowl. So I haven't worked a day in my life, so I don't know that I'll cease to work, but I will have a lot of time to coach up my four grandsons, and I'll have a consulting company if anybody wants me to consult with them. I'd be happy to.
well, I always love getting your take on just the college football postseason because it's so unique and it's almost impossible to understand unless you're actually in it, actually having those conversations, which you've been doing for a while now. And I feel like when anybody in college football retires in this day and age, we just assume it's because they got sick of the changing way of the sport. If this sport were the same as it was, when you're putting together so many of these key pillars in college football at the start of the 21st century, are you staying on board? We get on record saying like, hey, I didn't actually get pushed out of college football because it's changing. It's just kind of time.
No, no. I brought in McKinsey last year, so year and a half in advance, to make sure we had a coordinated effort to make the transition. Which David Epps, my VP of Marketing and COO, will take over the bowl as the president. So there's a nice conclusion to the end. So I've had this prepared. I'll be 71 years old, and this is the last year of the 12-year contract I signed for the Peach Bowl to join the CFP. So all the timing was right. And so now, having said that, I think college sports in general, not only college football, are really in bad shape, bad condition. The game is, you can't kill the game. It's the second most favorite sport in the country, but the leadership, is lacking. The vision is lacking, and yeah, that concerns me. But they'll find their way.
You've dealt with a lot of different teams having different attitudes towards bowl games over the years. What do you make of Notre Dame's decision to turn down the Pop-Tarts bowl berth in a way to kind of try and stick it to ESPN over getting left out of the playoff?
Oh boy, that's a good one. I could go on forever on that. I mean, I look at Notre Dame. I thought that the commissioners, when they did the new CFP playoff, they should have pushed Notre Dame into a conference to say, look, if we're going to do this, we need everybody to be in a conference. It's not unlike the NFL, which all of college sports is moving to a professionalized model. We're seeing it happen before our eyes. It'd be like the Pittsburgh Steelers, who I'm a fan of, being from Pittsburgh, being on their own, and all the NFL teams have to be in a conference.
It's weird.
And all of a sudden, Pittsburgh's saying, well, we should be in because of this. Well, when Jack Swarbrick was a part of that committee, um, he said, okay, we understand we won't get a bye because we're not in a conference. But then the second year, this year, they changed the rules to where you don't have to be a conference champ to get a bye. So all of a sudden, Notre Dame could get in as the top four teams. They could get a bye. So it changed in their favor, right? This new CFP in the second year. Um, we all say this is good for the kids. Everything's about the kids. Well, how do you let the kids not have the opportunity to play in a bowl game, right? And at the end of the day, everybody should be in a conference. Um, Unfortunately, college sports, the answer is money. And then you ask the question. And that's unfortunate. Um, we need a college football commissioner made up of a board of two commissioners, two players, two coaches, two ADs, and let them figure out the vision of where college football should be. There's no vision now. We have chaos, right? They should do the same for men's basketball, baseball, and women's basketball. And I would take all the Olympic sports and put them under the national governing bodies, like USA Swimming, USA Gymnastics, USA Track and Field, and let them compete on a regional basis again in events that national governing body has already established, and form Olympic teams from those competitions. Um, so that would be part of my answer. Now you need Congress to step in, which is tough. The presidents need to get out of making the decisions because, unfortunately, God bless them. We ask them to make decisions and they don't know everything about the sport, and they shouldn't. They're running billion-dollar corporations on their campuses with whether it's engineering or medical schools or research and everything else. So we have to have a central organization. I mean, the NFL, they think about pro sport, pro football 24/7, and they're the most favorite sport in this country. The second most favorite sport deserves that kind of focus and that kind of vision and that kind of leadership.
I totally understand why we're at this place wherein it's all over the place, because if you don't have a centralized focus and if presidents are the ones making these pivotal decisions without just being football focused, that's how we get to the current place that we're at. As someone that has experienced this on the back end, though, you talk about having like an advisory committee that's made up of not just a college football commissioner, but of having, coaches, of having players that would be part of these big decision makers in college football. Is there any world in which presidents will ever be willing to relinquish power? Because that's the only way we get anything close to a college football commissioner, or at least one group that's acting in everybody's best interest. Like, is that world ever going to exist? Because if it's not, like, I don't know, it's probably not even worth discussing if presidents are not willing to kind of get out of their own way.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if the system's broke right now. I mean, does it have to fall within itself for something to happen? But we need some leaders to step forward and say, hey, this game is too important to the country. It's too important to the schools. It's too important to the fans and the players. Um, that let's sit down. Um, the National Football Foundation is having their banquet. They have a great cross influence of leaders on their board. Maybe that's the type of organization that needs to say, hey, let's have a meeting and sit down with the presidents, the commissioners, the ADs, the coaches, and the players in a room together, and let's figure this thing out. Because whether it's the signing dates for high school, the transfer portal, the academic calendar, you can't go on like this. It's not sustainable. You're having de facto owners now in the case of, these big donors that are putting all this money into the schools. Um, you know, we shouldn't be professional sports. College sports should be the opportunity to give a kid a scholarship, give them a free education, get him that education so he gets a degree, and then get him a job. 98% of these kids aren't going to play pro. And even if you play pro, very few get to the fourth year of free agency where you make generational money. So at 25, 26, even if they go pro in 3 years, they're slotted now financially. They're not making generational money. They're going to have to pick up a lunch pail after their NFL career is over at 26, 27 years old, whatever it is. So, and with all the transferring, there's no connectivity with a kid to a college now. They're transferring 2 and 3 times. So the colleges, the donors don't know the kids. They're there for 9 months. They're taking classes online. There's no connectivity. So when they get out, they don't have a job. They don't have a connection to get a job. Um, I worry, frankly, what is going to be the mental issues these kids, this generation is going to deal with, because they're not having to face adversity, and they just transfer, and then they go to this school and they go to that school, and whether they get their degree or not, remains to be seen. But it just worries me that these kids are going to be left on an island without any connectivity to a school and alumni to help them get jobs, with these collectives that were pay for play. Instead, they should be getting the kids, and I don't mean only football. I mean all the kids: tennis, swimming, basketball, baseball, you name it. All those kids that go to your school, those collectives, those alumni should be helping them get jobs, to get placed in the society, to become, good citizens of the society. That's what we should be creating. And that's what college football is. That should be college sports. That's the mission, not professionalism, not the 2%. And so, yeah, there's so many concerns in college athletics right now. And unfortunately, we're seeing it. There's really not conferences. There's not conference play because you don't play everybody. Um, so you get situations like you had with the ACC with Duke and Virginia, and then Duke doesn't even get ranked. They're a champion, doesn't get in the playoff. Um, it's just a time to take a timeout and make it, instead of a 30-second, make it a full timeout and sit down and regulate some of the things that need to be done with college sports. You can't be firing coaches 3 games in like the NFL does. I mean, coaches should have a contract that goes all the way through the end of the last game they play, the bowl game that they play. But that's all a matter. They're all intricately involved in the calendar. And until you fix the calendar, you're going to continue to have those type of things. So,
Gary, you're in a different spot because you guys obviously Peach Bowl, college football playoff. But for those non-playoff bowls, you talk to these executives. How much panic is there right now after kind of seeing the way that even 5 and 7 teams that have the APR to be able to get in and play a bowl game, they're like, yeah, you know what, we don't really want to do this. It feels like there's going to be more opt-outs with the way that these bowls are being discussed and the lack of build-up for some of these games. Like, what is the panic level, do you think, behind the scenes with these bowl executives for those non-playoff games?
yeah, I guess I just read where Iowa State and Kansas State, because they lost their coaches, they aren't deciding to go to a bowl game either, and they're both bowl eligible. So that's, unless there's more, that's those two in Notre Dame that are all bowl eligible that aren't going to bowl games. So we used to worry about opt-outs of players getting ready for pros. Now you have to worry about the whole teams opting out. Um, I've told the bowls that are friends of mine that are below the CFP, um, that there should have an arrangement and sit down with the commissioners and let the commissioners, similar to the way they treat the CFP, pay an honorarium or an amount of money to the bowls that takes care of the bowls' expenses and their salaries and overhead, and let them make a little bit of money, because the commissioners and the conferences could put the bowls in their TV negotiations. They could make more money through their TV negotiations rather than a bowl negotiating a one game deal with a TV network. You have no leverage. So you can make more money in that case. And at the end of the day, the conferences are taking most of the money after a bowl game anyway. You could get better matchups instead of conference to conference. You just take the rankings, and and you know, I I'm getting out, so I guess I can talk freely. I think the bowls, we ought to start the beginning of the season with bowl games,
Mm,
similar to the way we started the kickoff game and have a huge matchup. You can debate the Miami Notre Dame game and say, well, Notre Dame didn't get in because it played Miami. Texas didn't get in because it played Ohio State. Miami got in because it played Notre Dame, right? So if you win the game, you're going to get benefit. If you lose the game and the other team that you lost to has a good season and you do what you're supposed to do, it's going to help you. It's a major data point. So I would start the season, I'd probably move it a week ahead. I'd probably go to 16 teams in a playoff. I'd probably start the games with major, you know, intersectional matchups in both sites to start the season. And with a 16-team playoff, which I don't know that they'll move to. They'll make a decision whether they want to stay at 12 or go to 16 or whatever they want to do. But I think with the more teams you put in a playoff, the more teams you're going to have probably that aren't going to want to play in a bowl game afterwards if they didn't make like we're seeing this year. And you got coaches changes because of the calendar and everything else. And in fact, frankly, I think the group of six, I would move my schedule to the spring, and I would play in March, April, May, June. And we've already proven that the TV networks, Fox and ESPN, want football in the spring, and neither USFL or UFL have been successful. Well, if I'm the group of six, I'd move to the spring, play my games then. Most of those kids are going to move up to the Power Four anyway and transferring, after their first year. If you make all conference, most of those kids have transferred up to the Power Four from the group of six. So have your own national championship. You'll get more TV dollars. You'll have your own season where people will focus on those teams and those games, and then have a national championship in June or May, whenever it is, whenever your season ends. So those are some of the things I would do in college football.
I think all ideas right now are on the table with the way that it's being viewed, the postseason and the deconstruction of it. You told this story a long time ago on the show, but I'd love to revisit when you first established a relationship with Nick Saban when he was at LSU. His team needed a bowl game to be able to play in. Can you retell like how that all happens behind the scenes and how basically it kind of led to Alabama turning Atlanta into a second home with you guys for that kickoff game throughout the 2010s?
Yeah, so Nick Saban was in his second year in 2000 at LSU, and I was in my second year as the CEO and president of the Peach Bowl. And my job was to select the teams, and I selected Georgia Tech, who was, I think, 14th in the country, and LSU was 8-4. The best bowl they could get to was our bowl, and I got a call, the only call I've ever gotten in 28 years as the CEO and president of the Peach Bowl, from Nick Saban. And Nick called and said, "Hey, Gary, we're trying to build a program at LSU. You're the best bowl we can get into. We'd love to come to Atlanta." And so I went to my board and basically said, "Well, we're going to take LSU." And they said, "No, we don't want LSU. They were here in '96. They didn't sell any tickets. Their coach Donardo wasn't, promoting the game. We don't want LSU." And so I flew down. I met with Nick, met with Chancellor Emmert. Mark Emmert was then Chancellor of LSU, later became the president of the NCAA, and Charlie Weems, their chairman of the board. And I said, "Look, our board has a concern that you're not going to sell tickets, you're not going to promote the game, and I need your assurance that you're going to do all those things." And Nick and Charlie Weems and Mark Emmert said, "We'll do whatever we need to do." And I still remember, I went to my board and I said, I visited with the AD, or with the commissioner, the president the chairman of the board and the head coach. They've guaranteed me they're going to do all these things, so we're going to pick LSU. And they said, and I said, I'll tell you what, if they don't do these things, you can fire me. I was in my second year. I said, I'll put my job on the line. And we picked LSU. I still remember the first day of ticket sales, LSU sold 16,421 tickets, which was a record at the time of first day of bowl sales. And they came up, and Rohan Davey in the second half came in to spell Josh Booty. He had Josh Reed in the back of the end zone. They beat Georgia Tech. And when I went back down on the campus, as I've always done for 28 years, to do a recap, because you got to be in continual improvement to get better. And they're our client, they're our customers. So we got to know how we did. Nick told me, he says, Gary, everybody that we recruited that year, Booger McFarland, Spears, all those guys signed with us. And that's the team in 2003 that led LSU to win the national championship. So fast forward to 2007, Nick takes the job at Alabama. They're 7-6 their first year. We make a bid to get into the BCS because they were going to bring a championship game on. And they wound up going to a double host model where the Rose, Sugar, Orange, and Fiesta hosted their game. And then 2 weeks later, they rotated the national championship. And in that year, the presidents legislated a 12th game to be added to the football schedules. And so I went to my board and I said, well, being a competitive son of a gun, I said, look, if they're not going to let us in the BCS on the backside, we're going to start the BCS on the front side. And so I started the kickoff game. I called it the Daytona 500 of college football, because prior to that, most teams would play three nondescript non-conference games, win 50-0. Attendance was poor, viewership was poor, and we came out of the blocks with Alabama and Clemson. Clemson was ranked number 9th with who was the running back they had, the real good running back.
Spiller,
Yeah,
CJ Spiller. Yeah.
CJ Spiller. And I called Alabama, and I called Nick and I said, Nick, I'm starting this game. Would love to have Alabama. Alabama had just finished 7-6 their first year, had to beat Louisiana Monroe to finish 7-6. People forget that. And Nick, in his second year, I said, we'd love to have you come over and play Clemson. They're going to be ranked top 10. Alabama was borderline top 25, maybe. And Nick said, Gary, I'd love to come over and help you. You helped me when I was at LSU. I'll help you get this game started. And if we can finish second to Georgia and recruits from Georgia, we'll play for national championship games and win national championships. So Alabama came over, won 34-10. We had a sellout. Viewership tripled on ESPN. And at the time, their president asked me, can you do 2 of these games on a weekend? Because the viewership was so good. But Alabama won the game 34-10, cover of Sports Illustrated. Alabama's back. And the next year, I had Alabama come play in the kickoff game against Virginia Tech, who was number 7 with Frank Beamer, and Alabama was number 5. Alabama wins the game, wins the national championship that year, and on their roster, they had 19 kids from Georgia. So Nick's always remembered that, and we built a relationship. He came to play in our kickoff game a lot of times, and we maintained a close friendship. And that's really, as Nick would tell you, that was the start of Alabama's run. When they won that game in 2008, the next year they won the national championship and went on that 10-year run that they had.
I'll always tell people, look, I realize Nick Saban is the godfather of the Alabama dynasty and the Alabama we know today, but if there's no Gary Stokan, there's no Nick Saban doing what he's doing in Alabama. Just throwing it out there. And the other interesting part of that story, and you talk about like establishing relationships with head coaches, with universities, how important that is in what you do. I remember you also had, because the first time we talked was right before the Bama Florida State game in 2017,
Right.
and you had developed a connection with Jimbo, and you wanted him to get Florida State to be able to play in the kickoff game. And after Florida State finally broke through and won it all in 2013, I say finally, even though it was like, finally from a 21st century standpoint, you've called Jimbo and he's like, all right, I think we're ready. I think we're ready to be able to take on a matchup like this. And you get this unbelievable billing, greatest opener in college football history. That's the billing going into this. And then DeAndre Francois goes down. FSU kind of crumbles that year. Jimbo leaves for Texas A&M. Gary, I think in addition to being responsible for the Bama dynasty, I think you're also responsible for one of the more pivotal college football developments of the playoff era, which is Jimbo Fisher, transitioning from Florida State to Texas A&M. So congratulations on that as well.
Well, the other thing, Connor, on that is that was the year of the 14 playoffs still. And that year, Alabama, number one, beats Florida State, number three, in the GOAT, like you mentioned, the greatest opener all time. And that was the opening of Mercedes-Benz Stadium. And Alabama did not win the SEC that year. And Alabama got into the 14 playoff because they beat number three Florida State. And they went on, I think they went on to win the national
They
championship
did.
that year. So without playing Florida State, without that kickoff game, they wouldn't have got into the 14 playoff because they didn't win their conference. And they went on to win the national championship. So yeah, we've been a part of, even being a part of Clemson's run when they beat LSU 13-12 on a last second kick in the Chick-fil-A Peach Bowl. The next year they beat Georgia, I think 10-7. And the word Clemsoning went out of the dictionary, and Clemson went on to, win two national championships. So we've been a part of Alabama and Clemson's runs, and big part of college football history.
Did you ever get the sense that Kirby was a little bit skittish about playing in Atlanta? Even though obviously, that sells itself. Georgia and Atlanta, they've obviously played both Georgia Dome, Mercedes-Benz a ton of times. But was there ever any sort of trepidation with Kirby, given the fact that for whatever reason, Georgia just seemed to kind of struggle there for as long as they did?
Well, think about this. We've also been a part of Georgia's run because I would always go visit. When I went to visit Nick at Alabama, I'd always stop by and see Kirby. And Kirby was the one assistant coach that was always in his office. He had papers all over the desk and the floor and, working on scheming and defense and everything. And when he got the Georgia job, his first game was in our kickoff game, Chick-fil-A kickoff game against North Carolina. And he told me when he got the job, he said, Gary, I've seen what the kickoff game did for Georgia. I'll play in as many kickoff games as you'll have us. And so I scheduled him in 16 against North Carolina, his first game. They played in I believe 18 they played, 20 they were supposed to play. COVID knocked us out. They played Oregon in 22
Yep.
and they played Clemson in 23. So yeah, we were part, and I guess it was in 19 or 20 when Georgia came and won on a last second field goal, beat Cincinnati in the BCS. And so, yeah, we've been a part of Clemson, Georgia, and Alabama's runs with whether it's our kickoff game or our bowl game.
So no, Kirby was not scared of you, is what you're saying. All right, that's good to know. Good to know. That makes Georgia fans a little bit more at ease. Now that you're on the way out, is there a coach who was maybe most difficult to deal with, or someone that you're just like, you know what? Sitting down at the table with them, you just didn't feel like your message was really sinking in with the value that you could provide.
I've been very blessed, whether it's been Steve Spurrier, Jimbo Fisher, Kirby, or Dabo, or Nick Saban. It was always interesting in the days before we had the Georgia Dome. The teams in the SEC would always want to go to Florida because of
Mm,
the warmth. And, it'd typically be cold in Atlanta in December. And I'll still remember in 2002, um, we had Tennessee and Maryland, I think. Um, and then in 2003, we had Tennessee again. And the Tennessee media, didn't think much of us. Um, but they came to Atlanta, and we had the Georgia Dome at the time, and sold it out. Great games. They lost both games. They lost to Maryland. I can't remember who they lost in the other one. Um, but you talk to their media now, the Michael Griffiths and the John Adams and the Jimmy Hines and all those guys, and it's like, man, we've seen the Peach Bowl grow from like the phoenix from the ashes. And I'll still remember Mark Bradley of the AJC. My first year, I took Georgia and Virginia, and Georgia was maybe 25, but Virginia was number 12. And our own newspaper in our own city had the headline of Georgia going to Peach Bowl, a third tier bowl game. So back in 1998, we were a third tier bowl game. And now, over the last 6 years, we're second only to the Rose Bowl in viewership and attendance. And we'll host, the potential of Indiana this year in our semifinal game. We've hosted four semifinals since the start of the CFP, and every year we've hosted the number one team in the country. So that's how far the Peach Bowl has come since 1998.
Okay, so I
And
just
probably the most important thing, I'm sorry, is that we're the most charitable bowl organization in the country. We've given $70 million since 1998 to charity, which is a record and by far the number one charitable bowl in all of the 44 bowl games out there.
I take that as Tennessee was the most difficult to deal with. I know that's not what you're
No, and
saying at all.
Philip Fulmer wasn't as a coach. There really wasn't a coach that was difficult to work with. I mean, always tried to build a relationship. Having coached for 3 years, I walked in their moccasins a little bit. Wasn't a head coach and wasn't in football, I was in basketball. But being in the sport, that long, I knew what they deal with, and had good friends. At every level was Bobby Knight or Mike Krzyzewski in basketball, and so I knew what coaches dealt with, and just try and build relationships with them, and that's what we were able to do. And now they play in our kickoff games, they play in our golf tournament, and so been very blessed. Been a blessed run.
So last one for you. Speaking of Indiana, who's the dream team to get into the Peach Bowl this year? After seeing the bracket, knowing that you essentially will have one of those, two of those six teams that are able to ultimately get there. What would be your ideal choice to have this one team at least play in your bowl game?
Well, I'll answer that by saying in 28 years, I've been the United Nations and been neutral. And so I'll remain neutral and just hope whoever we get is healthy and comes in and plays a great game, and we get four overtimes and set a TV record for viewership.
Gary, the correct answer was Indiana. You're speaking to an Indiana graduate. You look, massive alumni base. I've made the drive from Bloomington to Atlanta, actually. It's like an 8 hour drive. You can make that drive. You can fly. You can do whatever. But like that fan base that's just so amped up, that's going to be like, it costs what it costs. I will spend any amount of money to make sure that I am at that game. I don't know if I'm ever going to see it again in this lifetime. Like, look, I get it. Bama's got the proximity, whatever. Indiana's the right answer, in my unbiased
Well,
opinion.
I can understand your perspective, and I tell people that I'm from Pittsburgh, and Kirk Cignetti is from Pittsburgh, so everything is 6 degrees separation from Pittsburgh. So yeah, I'd welcome Kurt and his Pittsburgh connections, and certainly to have number one would be a great accomplishment for the Chick-fil-A Peach Bowl. So I wish Indiana well. I will tell you, I've never seen a coach in 2 years do what he's been able to do at any school. And you would know better than I, probably because you're more of a historian. I don't know that there's been a greater run in 2 years than what Kirk Cignetti has done at Indiana. And so to get them number one and to beat Ohio State this past weekend was a phenomenal accomplishment in itself. What was it, 1948 since they last won the Big Ten? Is that right?
67, I think, was the official,
67?
but yeah, for more than half a century ago was what we're talking about here. And I mean, the numbers are unbelievably staggering. it's still going to be, it's still very surreal to think that the next time Indiana plays football, it'll be as a 1 seed in the Rose Bowl. Like, just none of that makes any sort of sense.
So you going out to the Rose Bowl?
I will not be. I will
Oh,
not be.
what do you mean? You got to
Um,
be as an Indiana grad.
my duties covering the SEC will although the on the irony being that they're going to face an SEC team, obviously with Alabama and Oklahoma the winner going to that game.
Well, you need to
Um,
negotiate a better deal there because you have SEC on one side and Big Ten on the other.
I know. Maybe I'll talk to the bosses, see if they can swing a trip out to Pasadena.
There you go.
We'll see what we can do. We'll see if they take my very
Well, let me know
unbiased
if I can
approach.
negotiate that deal for you.
Look, Gary, you're the best at it. You have made a name for yourself, made a name for the Peach Bowl for a very, very long time, and really appreciate you coming on all these years, and wish you a happy retirement. And hopefully, in addition to like still working, you're gonna actually get to just sit back and watch this crazy little sport that we get to talk about all the time.
Well, Connor, let me express my appreciation to you. You've always been great to us and having us on, and you do a great job. You're always on top of things, and I've enjoyed our conversation. So, thank you very much. Have a Merry Christmas, and hopefully, I see you at the Chick-fil-A Peach Bowl this year.
Peach Bowl, much more likely than the Rose Bowl. I'll be honest on that one, given the
There you
proximity.
go.
Thanks, Gary.
All right, take care, Connor. Thanks.
Before we get to the rest of the podcast, I want to talk to you guys about Kalshi. This is something that is blowing up right now. Maybe you've seen people reference Kalshi in relation to a lot of different things that are going on in the world. And basically, this is a place where you can make money off of predictions. What do we do on these preview pods? We predict things. We tell you, hey, this is how you would bet here. This is how you would bet there. This isn't betting. This is sports trading. This is the ability to make predictions and say, hey, I can make money off of that. If you go to Kalshi right now, you can see that they have markets for a variety of different things. You can predict who's going to be the next head coach at UNC or Penn State, or these different things that there are markets for. And the cool thing about this, all 50 states you can do this in. They are legal at the federal level. It's not a state-by-state deal. And so Kalshi has just a wide variety of things that you can make picks on, make predictions on, and win money. It's a really, really cool source to be able to kind of flex some of those prediction muscles. I know all of you listening to this, you guys can see into the crystal ball. So use the promo code SDS, get signed up today, and make yourself some money on Kalshi. All right, Will, let's close with some lad of the week. Let's start with actually your lad of the week. I forgot to mention someone in all these coordinator changes, and maybe one of the most pivotal coordinator moves of the offseason. So fire away.
Yeah, so my lad of the week is Colin Klein, a guy that, boy, doesn't it make us feel old, man. I mean, one of the most interesting Heisman invitee lists of all time. Back in the day when it was Johnny Manziel that had won, we had Manti Te'o at number 2, and we had Colin Klein at number 3, who was essentially just sitting there like, hey, happy to be here. Don't want any press following me around. You boys, take it away. Let's get all the media on y'all's situations this year. I am going to be a ball coach one day. I'm going to have a nice family. And he is already living that dream, man. He is able to go back to his alma mater at Kansas State, where he was kind of exactly what I was talking about, a guy that stayed, that was the heart and soul of that program. And, they've had kind of ups and downs there with their coaches. But I think that he, at age 36, is already living the dream. He's already embodied that program. When you think of one Kansas State player outside of Darren Sproles, if you're a little bit, more of our age, or you don't exactly remember the
Colin
3
Klein.
season. You think what?
I think Colin Klein. Yeah.
Yes. And I never want to slander Darren Sproles. He did a ton against, Oklahoma in that game. Thank you to him as an LSU fan. But that being said, like Colin Klein being, again, dual threat, massive guy, heart and soul, that like kind of like a Tim Tebow light when that was the vogue at the time. The way that he rebuilt the A&M offense, I think, is so prolific, coming from that pro-style Jimbo situation. Benching a quarterback in year 1 last year that was a 5-star guy, and Connor Wigman, and going to Marcel Reed, basically revitalizing the offense and changing everything, bringing in the guys out of the portal, utilizing the different running backs and receivers, taking the strength of the team, which is the offensive line, and saying, hey, we're going to punch you in the mouth, but we're going to be impossible to stop on the outside and keep people guessing. I think that this is a guy who obviously gets it in Kansas State, and we're seeing more and more of these. Now that the head coaching cycle is kind of concluded, I can go ahead and say, these guys didn't leave. Brent Key didn't leave. Clark Lee didn't leave. Colin Klein is going to Kansas State. Maybe more guys can stay at their alma mater long term and win there if the NIL commitment is there to say, hey, we know you're a great coach. We're going to take the first shot on you and make you our Kirby Smart.
Jeff Brom, another one.
Yep,
Didn't
Jeff
leave.
Brom.
Didn't leave. Yeah. It's it's a brutal blow for Mike Elko. You knew that there was a good possibility. And if you had 2 years of this version of Colin Klein, that was going to be a win. You got what you set out to have when you made that hire, a hire that we praised at the time, and is a big reason why A&M is getting into the college football playoff for the very first time. And I didn't think about this too. I think I saw this from Texags about how you talk about that Heisman ceremony and how legendary it is. And I didn't think about how Colin Klein has to walk past Manziel's Heisman stuff all the time. He's had to do that the last 2 years, and just see that and see those reminders of, man, like I was so close. I just missed out. But yeah, he's going to be a very fun coach to watch, running the offense that he runs. And it makes the Big 12 that much more interesting, because the Chris Kleiman thing this year, it finally felt like it got stale. Really good coach, but him retiring wasn't necessarily a stunner, I think, in college football. And Colin Klein obviously makes so much sense there for all those reasons. But it's going to be a pivotal move for Mike Elko moving forward of what he's going to do to be able to fill that vacancy.
Oh, and really quick, man, the Colin Klein resume is actually so funny because, starts with the player 08, 2012, Kansas State, right? One offseason with the Montreal Alouettes, chase your dream king, whatever. Okay, back, Kansas State, year in Northern Iowa, Kansas State, new title, Kansas State, new title, Kansas State, new title, Kansas State, new title, Texas A&M, Kansas State head coach. And so that's what they love.
I think he had play calling duty stripped at one point when he was at Kansas State, had to kind of like set back, like reassess, and then he eventually got them back, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, and I mean, guys, like, I hate doing the revisionist history thing where people go, oh, well, you had him in the building, you should have done X, Y, and Z. A lot of times, like, we saw that with Corey Raymond at LSU, where he left, went to Florida, wasn't the right fit for him. Like, sometimes guys do need to look in the mirror or they weren't ready. And I mean, having that much of a career focus and already having kind of a step back, step to the side, back to the original situation at 36. And I love that you talked about Manziel kind of going forward, because, like, hey, man, love Manziel, love the party boy thing. He's on, the Vandy sideline, like we were talking about, rooting for Pavia because they're both my age. And that being said, like, I joked throughout the year about Marshall Reed. Like, how come Manziel's not, like, hanging out with Marshall Reed? He's having almost as good of a season.
He did, though.
Right. But what's even funnier is that would be a situation where they would kind of look at each other, Klein and Manziel, and kind of be like, hey, it's kind of like, I hate to say it, man, because I love Manziel. It's kind of like the Peakton High School guy, man. It's like, okay, you're still on the sideline. We're in the chain. We're in the jersey. I'm about to go be a head coach in the Big 12. I got my family. I'm going over here. And it's so weird, like, where it's like you could see on the stage these three guys were together, but how differently their lives have all gone since then. Klein really the only guy who never got an NFL shot, and he's got the best life because of it.
Colin Klein, Will Stein, Kenny Dillingham, Connor O'Gara. Same class in school. Travis Kelce, Taylor Swift. All of us could have been in the same algebra class in high school. Crazy. Didn't happen.
Look at that, man.
Yeah. All right. My lad of the week is Clark Lee. Chris Lee had this video. Clark Lee told local media that Vandy was entirely to blame for not getting in the college football playoff, not the selection committee. What a concept.
Ball coach. This is exactly the type of guy I'm talking about, folks.
He said, quote, "There's no one's fault but our own. We had opportunities and we didn't do enough. We are not victims in this process. Our ownership is in coming up short." Hey, Notre Dame, you could have done that. You could have done that, but you didn't. You didn't. And look, Notre Dame, you should know that Clark Lee is an adult, because that's a guy who left your program to get his first head coaching opportunity. And let's just say, God forbid, that Marcus Freeman ever decided that he wanted to like test the NFL waters or something like that. You know that your first call is going to Clark Lee. Point blank, that is your guy. And I know that there's going to be a lot of attention on Saturday night on the Pavia family. Understandably so. I hope they give other people in attendance camera time besides Diego Pavia's mom and his brothers, if they're allowed in there. I don't know how that's going to work. What a dynamic that's going to be. Some very Happy Gilmore at the country club type vibes with the Pavia brothers.
But I'm so fired up to see Clark Lee in New York. I am. What a perfect representative of that university on that stage. I love that Clark Lee has embraced all this Pavia stuff, and maybe that's kind of an overlooked part of his story. But he's been wearing the Pavia Heisman hat everywhere that he's been going. He's let Diego Pavia be himself, which you could say at times maybe Pavia is a little bit much and you'd like him to be more reserved or whatever. But if he's not that dude on the field, Vandy is not doing the things that it's doing. That's pretty much what this comes down to. And I don't think it's been talked about enough. I probably haven't done a good enough job talking about that, of Clark Lee, a kind of mild-mannered, a fiery but mild-mannered, more conservative, very different personality than Diego Pavia, being a defensive-minded guy, letting him operate the way that he has. I love me some Clark Lee and think that he deserves to get all the face time as well on Saturday night.
He's such an interesting situation, right? Because often people will kind of mask why they don't like a player because they do something that's like actually like reprehensible or criminal. He really hasn't. You could talk about his brother getting arrested. You could talk about, oh, his mom's annoying, whatever. But like, he doesn't have any of kind of the off the field drama. Diego Pavia, does not have that like a Manziel did. And I think that just kind of goes to show.
There was a tough video 4 years ago at New Mexico State with a certain logo that he may have, let's just say, expressed himself on.
Okay, I forgot about that. That's a good point. That's fair. But if you're in the SEC. But again, like, is that really why you're mad? It's not like he's doing that on the Alabama A or something, right? Yeah. So, like, that would be a little different. I hate to say it that way, but this is the big leagues, right? If people care about stuff like that, So, that being said, like, there is something to letting a guy be himself and knowing that. I always say, like, when I give people, like, when we talk about social media or marketing, it's like, be yourself, be authentic. That's what it is. And I think some of those guys need to be kept between the buoys, like a Manziel or a like Steven Garcia needs to be kept between the buoys, right? With Pavia, he's been a great leader. He's been a little bit more of like that Stetson Bennett mold where it's like, hey, once you lock it in, like when you're in practice, you're leading practice. You're there early. You're getting the boys fired up. You're leading by example. You're taking the big hits. You're giving the big hits. So I think if we could all clone Diego Pavia, I think most SEC teams would take him. Certainly, there are a couple here and there. I like Gunnar Stockton. I like Ty Simpson. Whatever. Yeah, I totally get that. But for a floor raiser, I'm going to keep saying it. One-man offense. He's been a great representation, I think, of Vanderbilt and how they're changing the culture. Because it's one thing to be a party boy at LSU or Ole Miss, be a Bo Wallace, be a Chad Kelly, be whatever. It's one thing. It's another to be in Nashville, in Vandy, at that prestigious institution, making it look cool. And to me, I think he's made it look cool.
I actually look back now on the media day stuff wherein I confessed I was wrong about his 5'9" frame. And I wonder if he had anything extra in his shoes. I can't wait for that official measurement. He's going to the Senior Bowl. Got that announcement this morning. Excited to see what that looks like. Hopefully, we're going to get a true measurement. But let's just say he is 5'9". Good for 5'9" guys everywhere that he's doing this.
He's going to pull up with like just a fro.
Yeah.
And they're going to be like, and he's going to find a way to game the system. But yeah, and you're talking about Clark Lee. I don't want to make it all about Pavia, but that is letting guys be themselves, right? Yeah. It is saying, I'm not above the system. And like I said earlier, you can see when a coach makes the right decision and when they are ego-driven. And one thing about Clark Lee is he hasn't been ego-driven. He's known where the strength is. It's from Tim Beck and those boys from New Mexico State. It's from Barton Simmons, and he's not saying this is the Clark Lee style. And if you don't play that, hit the door.
I'm gonna have my mom and her partner in town this weekend. They're staying with us for a long weekend. My mom and her partner, they always come in during Heisman weekend. It's like now that it's in between the playoff, it's a nice time to be able to see her, and we don't go up there for Christmas just because of how hectic it is. Claire and I will take a trip to Chicago in January. But nonetheless, I am looking forward to having to explain the Pavia story to them as we're watching this, and all the different elements that went into this and how this guy has gotten to this stage. Because my mom is like all in with Indiana. She knows everything Fernando Mendoza related, and she's not going to have to be told anything about his background or anything like that. She has been locked in. Even my mom, as an Illinois graduate, has gone above and beyond to make sure she has a firm spot on the Indiana bandwagon. but explaining the Pavia stuff is going to be a little bit different, just a little bit. So looking forward to it. I can't wait for it. I think so. A little housekeeping here. We will not have a pod this weekend. Because there are no games. There are no SEC games this weekend, Army, Navy, obviously. But we will still...
Well, troop disrespect. Look at this. Wow.
Look,
I'm sorry. It's just our prestigious service academies playing this weekend, Connor. Sorry, it's not good enough.
Apparently, I don't support the troops. No, we do. But we will not have a pod this weekend. I'll probably do like a video on how I filled out my Heisman ballots. So make sure you're following us on social. We'll discuss all that. And then we will record again next Wednesday. And we will preview all the playoff games. We'll have a ton of playoff breakdown stuff. And we'll dig into all that there. So I know we covered a lot of different stuff. It was kind of a empty the notebook type of pod today. But I felt like we were overdue for one of those. Okay. Leave us a 5-star review. Subscribe to our YouTube channel where you can watch every episode of Started Down South podcast. Follow us on Twitter at the SDS Pod, at Sat Down South, at TJ O'Gara, at Ghost Horror. Thanks, guys. Talk soon.